everyone. My name is Girish Agarwal. I hope you're having a wonderful time here in Data and Innovation Summit. It has been a wonderful day yesterday and really good speakers and a lot of interesting discussions that I have been part of, and I hope you guys are enjoying the same. So my topic for today that I wanted to spend some time talking on is merging IT and digital, the two parts or two legs, I would say, within the IT domain that has come out in a big way in organizations these days. But before getting into that, a short background about myself. My name is Girish Agarwal, as I said. I work as the Chief Digital and Information Officer for PIAB, which is into industrial automation. So we serve, PIAB serves multiple industries for bringing about automated gripping, lifting, and moving solutions. My experience in the industry has been almost about 20 years. The first 10 has been as a consultant, primarily working for implementing ERP systems in IT consulting and so on. And then the last 10 years has been in different product companies like GE Healthcare, like Husqvarna, and now PIAB. And in those product companies, my responsibility has been around managing, setting up, and accelerating different kinds of IT organizations and digital organizations in the last 5-6 years. And that can be innovation, it has been AI labs, it has been enterprise architecture, and so on and so on. But one thing which I think organizations in general and IT organizations in specific has really struggled over the last, I would say, maybe 5 years, half a decade or so, has been regarding ambidexterity. That if I take some time back, maybe about 100 years back, when organizations started to work on the research part, then the research and development were two different organizations within industrial companies, for example. But then lately, they both, or companies tried to be ambidexter. So they try to combine these organizations into one, and which they call R&D organizations. But then there was always a tussle between the research part and the development part. And hence, I would say last 20 years or so, you see that companies have started to come up with something that they call primary development unit. So that's nothing but core futuristic research part. So we see these cycles within the industry a lot. And IT is not untouched either. And that's why the incumbent companies where traditional IT has been around for a long time, for example, for their supply chains, for their finance systems, for their manufacturing systems, and so on. And now we see that we need IT tools, IT approach, IT technology for the flexible part of the business, which we also sometimes say digital business. So new kind of business models which needs to be adapted, which are flexible, which has to be changed on short notice based on the customer feedback and so on. So those kinds of IT systems are becoming more and more of a need in the digital economy. And that's why what is really interesting is that what we have to deal with is the complexity of enterprise IT and the digital acceleration at the same time. And what does that mean is that we do not, the IT organization and the digital organization is not only required to support, but also at the same time is required to accelerate and transform the business processes or transform the business for the enterprise going forward. And so what needs to be balanced is that on one hand, we should have scalability and stability into our IT organizations. And on the other hand, we have to operate in a way where we can learn, adapt, and adopt in a very short cycle, not only the technology, but also the ways of working. And that's why if you see that, to solve this, there is no real magic bullet. And that's what we will, or I will try to shed some light upon based on our experience that I have had in a few companies in the past. But in order to understand that, it's important that when I say enterprise IT, what I mean are traditional business processes within the incumbent companies like supply chain, like manufacturing, where the area of business is certain, objectives are clear, and we can predict and plan. But then in the digital side of things, we do not have clear goals. We do not know if such a use case, for example, a data-driven solution or a data-driven service, will that really work? How the API usage for a company will grow. Will it accelerate? Will it peak out? We do not know, and the environment is changing very rapidly. So the relationships between the action and outcome is rather unclear. And despite of these complexities, the enterprise is one. So even though we have the two worlds within IT and digital, as we said, it's one firm. And we have been working, for example, again, I'm referring to when I say we, the incumbent industrial manufacturers have been working on these packaged applications, the ERP, CRMs, and so on, and primarily with their, let's say, customers or partners or suppliers. But now more and more custom apps are coming up, which also require the same data sets, which are in the same packaged applications. Even our customers and partners are exposed to these custom apps. Not only that, you see the social media, the mobility, the cloud platforms, solution as a service, which we are using more and more, not only in the digital side, but also on our traditional IT side. So more and more SaaS solutions embedding into our package applications, into our manufacturing systems, into our supply systems for traceability, for logistics reasons, for warehousing reasons, and so on and so on. So it's really important that we try to find synergies, and how does these two technologies stack, so to say, if the enterprise IT or the digital is what I mean here, how are they complementing each other? Or do they complement, or do they contradict each other? Are they making us fast? Are they making us slow? And so on and so on. And that's why today, I would want to cover these three, or this is the logical sequence that I would want to cover, talking about the enterprise IT and the digital, and how do we take this forward. So the first step would be that we take a step back to just understand the complexity a little more, to understand what is the complexity that we are talking about. Then we will get into the actual mapping. How do we map that complexity for our enterprise into our strategy, into our capabilities? And then once we have mapped it, then we will try to see an outline and approach to deliver value. And how can we tackle, if not reduce, but at least tackle this complexity at the same time? So to start with, understanding the nature of complexity. And my experience says that it's actually not about the technology. When we say the IT, enterprise IT and digital, well, I being a technologist shouldn't say this, but from my experience, as I said, I would still say that it's not about technology. It's not about IT. That's the easy part. It's more to do with the approach, with the decision-making, with the leadership, with the style that we incorporate into our ways of working. So as I said, if we take a step back and try to understand the complexity. So let's say, maybe some of you are already aware of the Stacy matrix or the Sinefine matrix. People have tried to look into the complexity, that if you're talking about a complexity, why do I call a situation or a specific thing as complex as compared to a simple? It's primarily because, and there are many theories, as I said, but if we just pick one, for example, by Ralph Douglas Stacey, the one that you see on the left side here, that if we have certainty in a situation, and do we have an agreement that how do we solve this? If both the certainty as well as agreement is low, then we tend to term it as a simple situation. So the complexity is not there, and it's quite a simple way to deal with that situation, for example. But as and when the certainty and agreement starts to change, the situations can be complicated, they can get complex, and then when both certainty and agreement are not there, then the situation becomes chaotic. So if now we say that on one hand, the enterprise IT could be in a different part of the matrix that you see on the left, and our digital solutions, digital services are probably in a different part of the matrix that you see on the left. And then the interesting aspect starts, that if it is a simple situation, then we can use best practices, we can use standard solutions. But when the situation is a little complicated, then the knowledge plays a bigger role in decision-making. Judgment, the judgmental decision-making or political decision-making really needs to be done. And when the things are complex, it can be trial and error or an emergent practice. We learn as we go ahead. Of course, in a chaotic state where no one wants to be, anarchy needs to be played. So the point that I'm trying to drive is that the complexity really needs to be understood. And that this approach is not, so the decision-making is very much dependent on the complexity that you get into. And different companies, I think, are in different situations. One size does not fit all. So understanding the complexity, I think, that is there a complexity? And if yes, then where are those complexities if we want to match these two, enterprise IT and digital together, I think is something that the companies should spend time upon. Because once you have done that, I think the approach that how do you take it forward will be very different. So for example, in a simple situation, the approach can be you sense, you categorize, and then you respond, because there are repeating patterns. There is a clear cause and effect relationship. You know for a fact that there are clear answers that how do you solve it. For example, if you have let's say at the end of month, when you are doing a month-end closure and your finance invoices or journals are stuck, there is a standard procedure. You know what to do, how to do, and then you solve it. So there are clear answers. But when you get into complicated situations, which might be the case where you need an expert to diagnose what is the problem. And then we can say that in the approach in a complicated situation could be that answers can be found. It has been done in the past and it can be done again. There might be more than one right answers, but it can be found. And in case of complex, where the influx and the predictability is a bit more, unpredictability is a bit more higher. There might not be any right answers. So there we need to find answers together, maybe. And then, of course, in a chaotic situation that you might land up in, for example, in your enterprise within IT or within digital, then there might be high turbulence, and then you need to act. You do not have time to sense or probe. You act first. And then after acting, you sense and respond. So one approach doesn't fit all either. And that's another reason of why we should take a step back and understand the complexity before we start to take an approach, how to take it forward. But not only approach, even the style, I think, has to be very different based on the complexity situation that the firms might be in. So for example, the control mechanism that you might want to take in a simple situation might be monitoring form of control. You just monitor. If there is any failure, only then you act or only then you react. But in a complicated situation, you might have to make some compromises or negotiations, or you might have to take an ideological control based on logical increments and so on. And in complex situations, you might have to do brainstorming, you might have to do agenda building, you might have to do identification, development, and selection procedure in an iterative fashion, and so on. And I would leave chaotic, which is denoted by number 4 here, maybe for some other, because I think chaotic is a situation where probably no one wants to be, not even on the digital side or the enterprise IT side. But sometimes you land up there. And then, of course, you should have a way out from there. But I think, as I said, that can be a complexity of its own, and we can deal with it maybe in a separate session. But again, the message here is that the decision-making style, the approach, the control mechanism, and even the leadership style has to be really different based on the complexity that we are talking about. For example, the 2 pictures that you see here, one was a wartime hero, where you act first and then you sense and try to make the understanding of the situation. Whereas on the other hand, you see, which is very, very core, very, very basic, and you can sense and then come up with a solution plan and then go and implement it. So the leadership style also has to be very different. But all of this it's all about combining these two or these different approaches together in organizations, which make them even more ambidextrous, of course. So if you see the triangle on the right, if we say that, okay, that's the enterprise IT, and if we map them into the Gartner Pace Layer model of systems of record, systems of differentiation, and systems of innovation, but then when we put the DevOps part of delivery in the digital teams going forward, then probably their more focus is on system of innovation as compared to system of differentiation and record, for example. So that's why I think the first step and the foremost step is to understand that what is the complexity that we are talking about within an organization, and there is no right or wrong answer, and it's very much dependent on company strategy. And then we can get into how the decision making is done, what approaches will work, what style, what leadership can work, and so on and so on. So understanding the complexity, and once that is done, then of course we need to map the complexity for our own enterprise. And that is very much dependent on sometimes even our industry, sometimes even our strategy, and also on our capabilities that we want to build. And the mapping that we need to do on individual, the complexity mapping that we need to do on our individual enterprise probably needs to be done not only at the technology side of it, that how and what the architecture and so on should look like, but that also needs to be done on our business processes, that what kind of business processes do we want to keep and do we want to support. So for example, we have been in this Corona period, and hopefully we are out of it very soon. But that was another learning, for example, the evolution of humans, which has taken millions of years as compared to insects and as compared to these viruses, which was mutating maybe in a few days or weeks. And where in this journey are our organization? And that, of course, can be driven by which industry, which domain, or which region do you or the enterprise belongs to. But I think that's a crucial part, that we need to map and understand our organization and the complexity in it. And then one way of mapping can be, of course, I think maybe you guys have seen this many times before, and this is nothing new, but this is the Gartner technology base layer model, which can be one way of mapping. And one approach will not fit all. So if you see that there could be one approach for decision-making, leadership style, and so on for system of record, which we, for example, for traditional IT could be a simple set of applications. But then for system of differentiation, maybe it's the complicated or the complex part of it. There, the approach has to be very different. Maybe you need one team for different pace layers here, or can we combine them? For example, again, Do we need same KPIs for these different applications, different business processes? Do we need same ways of working? Do we need same ways of product management or project management within these applications, within these processes? So we have to then start, once we know our complexity, we have to start mapping it. And one of the ways I said could be, which is very easy, is the technology base layers. But then the other could be the capability model. This is again coming from Gartner, for example, that what are the capabilities that we want to invest in our company, in our enterprise? What do we want to divest in? So we still need the capability, but we will divest it. We will outsource it. Do we keep it internal? Do we keep it external? And that could be another way of mapping your complexity into your organization. What is our USP? Where is agility required and where is stability required? So maybe based on my industry, based on my USP, my supply chain or my pricing or my logistics has to be very stable as compared to my product offerings. My product design can be very flexible. So that also will then decide where is the complexity in which part of the capability within my organization, which business processes drive what kind of complexity that we understood in step one, for example. So, and there are many other ways, but for example, if I just take an example forward, so let's say, I don't know if you have come across this OODA loop from John, where he says that, okay, for example, in case of any complexity, if you have to act, what you do is you observe as a first step, where you take in a lot of inputs, a lot of feedback from different places. And then based on your observation, you orient yourself, you structure yourself, you think, and you make a plan. And once you've done that, then you decide, and then you act. And now, if you see here, in a simple case, in an obvious case, as I said, the approach could be sense, categorize, and respond. And there, if you see that, okay, maybe if in certain business process, which is obvious, which is simple in terms of complexity, and if we come across a decision making, then we can directly go to decide. Because we have already observed, we have best practices, we know, we have already oriented around it. So in this OODA cycle, for a simple complexity or for a simple situation, we might start to decide directly. But for a complicated situation, I might want to orient first. So I need to sense, I need to analyze before we can respond. But we don't need to observe because there is a lot of data already available for a complicated situation. We have been there in the past. But then for some business processes, we might want to actually go and observe first. So that might be the complex where you need to probe before you sense and respond. And then, as I said before, maybe in chaotic case, you might directly need to act. So, there have been some companies who try to combine these different kinds of situations into one framework so that we have a common framework that we can act upon based on the complexity of the situation that we are in. So if decision-making has to be done in a situation, depending upon what kind of situation it is, we just go in the right process path of this OODA loop, for example. So again, different kinds of approaches that companies take. But as I said, this doesn't only have to be done on the business process side, but also on the technology side. So the two stacks that you see, the enterprise IT stack on the left as a left pillar and the digital stack on the right pillar from a technology perspective, they really need to support the enterprise with the same, I would say, weight, with the same. If one grows bigger than the other, then the enterprise actually does become unstable. So a classic example is, let's say data platforms that companies today are struggling to come up with. Should the data platform be same for our digital and for IT, for our connected products and our enterprise data, or should they be different? And there is no right or wrong answer. Of course, the relationships between these two, should it be one, should it be different, really needs to be understood. And that comes from our strategy, from our situation, and enterprise specific situation based on the industry and based on all the other aspects that we spoke about. But interesting is that when we are designing such an enterprise, such pillars, if there are 2 or 1 or 3, then we have to make sure that the obvious ones are that, okay, IT activities adding to IT success and digital activities adding to digital success. But the undermining ones are where the IT activities are delivering towards digital success and the other way around. And also the reinforcing activities where digital success actually reinforces IT success and the other way around as well. And that is where the value adds are. So when it comes to the technology mapping, it's really important to make sure that the undermining and the reinforcing aspects of the technology stacks are always taken care of before we start to get into solutions. So this brings us to the third part of my presentation today. And there, here we will talk about that if we have understood the complexity within our organization, and we have also looked into some of the mapping ways that, okay, how do we map now if after the complexity has been understood within an enterprise and we have different tools and different ways of mapping that complexity into different approaches, how do we then take it forward to deliver the value? and maybe reduce the complexity or to tackle the complexity in a good way. And to be honest, there is no golden rule here. One size does not fit all. There are things, different companies have taken on different approaches. For example, some take it from a business strategy perspective, some take it like APIs, some find a solution from platforms, some have a solution towards a different architecture. So this last part of the presentation will not talk about a golden bullet, that this is the way to do it, but it will be more of our observations from the industry that what different companies are doing. So for example, the first one is that different companies take different kinds of business strategy. So for example, if we are talking about a simple situation, again, going back to our Stacy matrix, if you see on the left, then annual budgeting is very good when it comes to simple situations or where the complexity is not there. But in other cases, we need to have let's say, develop value and culture, as you see. If our, if we are into a complex situation or a complicated situation, then we need to really develop as we go along. We need to sometimes co-create value together with our customers in a complicated situation because it's not very obvious as compared to in a simple situation. And sometimes we have to look into long term. So there's a lot of finance, budgeting, there's a lot of customer orientation, procurement strategy, a lot of strategies which are dependent, again, based on the situation that the company is in. And if you see on the right side, it's also about the PMO, the VMO. What are our product management styles that we support within the company? How do we do this through our strategic vendors? Do we take in-house resources to manage those things and so on? Is also very much dependent on the complexity. So a lot of business strategies, sometimes companies that they try to take the strategy, they actually map it back to the complexity, that because of this complexity in our situation, that's the business strategy that we want to take. Some companies solve this also, or try to solve this ambidexterity through platforms, and platforms are a typical way these days to create or for example, merge the enterprise IT and the digital IT, because then the data sets, the learnings from both of these platforms can come together at one place. And typical examples are Uber and Airbnb, where, for example, we have the network effect. We have complementaries, where more suppliers gets more customers and more customers get more suppliers, for example. And one thing complements upon the other to create these network effects. And so platforms are another where traditional, I would say, manufacturing companies are trying to get into. Another way is this API economy, where they are trying to monetize data. So everything in traditional IT and in digital world, for example, talk to each other through APIs. And even if you are very low down in the food chain in your industry, for example, API enables things like the same IT system, the same data, even though you are lower down in the food chain, can be sold multiple times to multiple stakeholders, giving multiple values. And that is another way, for example, that people or companies are trying to merge this ambidexterity that we're talking about. Also, architectural options. We spoke about one, which was the formal touch points, that if we have our IT, enterprise IT and digital as two technology stacks, then we try to create formal touch points. Maybe there are no formal touch points, but we have a common ground, and then they do not talk to each other on the top, or they are one, they're not different. But sometimes even in some organizations, there might be an organization wall in between where we say that, no, they do not need to talk to each other. So this is my last slide, and to put it together based on my experience again, I think there's some points that I really would want you guys to take back from my experience, that if we want to drive enterprise agility towards the ambidexterity where the traditional IT as well as the new digital has to coexist, there are some 5-6 really core bullets from my experience which needs to be considered. The first one being collaboration and open communication. I think that everyone in the company wants to work on betterment of the enterprise. That's at least what I have learned. And that's why if they just start to collaborate, if digital and traditional IT, they start to work together, collaborate, open communication, I think people find solutions and we just move forward. The other one is that it's not about technology. That's the easy part. It's about the behavior, it's about the culture, it's about the approach. Then it is very specific for every enterprise. There is no golden bullet. So it has to be mapped, the future vision, the business capabilities, all of those needs to be mapped for the specific enterprise. And then there will still be failures. And I think failure is a negative word, but it all means that if you are learning from them and moving forward, then this is never a failure. But there will be uncertainties, and hence it has to be adapted as we go along. Whatever strategy, whatever approach that we take, we should always be ready to adapt it. And that means that adaptation in finance or in the way that we budget, for example, getting out of yearly budget cycles into rolling forecasts, not talking about ROIs, but talking about value and so on. And then the last is, this self-managing and high-performing teams. End of the day, it all boils down to people. So I think people are the one who will really make a difference to bring about this MBA dexterity in the organizations, which I think is going to be crucial for the incumbents to succeed in future. Thank you so much for listening in. And I hope that you enjoyed and got some good inputs from this talk today. And I wish you a very good day ahead and enjoy the rest of Summit. Thank you so much for listening.